A very good evening, viewers. You're watching India Sense. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. Let's start Friday evening with headlines coming in. First up, the Trump era has started with disruption and uncertainty for lakhs of highly skilled Indian Americans due to the executive order on birthright citizenship. Coupled with long green card waiting period, this could lead to possibly reverse brain drain in America. Trump's victory has led to a Make West Great Again movement where hard-right parties and leaders are coming out against all things leftist. Will leaders like Javier Milei, Meloni, Marine Le Pen and Pierre Poilievre come together for the NWGA movement. Indian security has prepared for a two-front war with Pakistan and China on two sides. But as Bangladesh keen to explore military cooperation with intel sharing and other possible arrangements with Pakistan, is this now becoming a larger nexus? India Sense decodes. Will India see massive trade tariffs under Trump administration, or will this expedite trade talks between India and the US for a possible free trade pact? We speak with former US Assistant Trade Representative Mark Linscott. And Hamas is set to release 4 women hostages tomorrow. As per reports, 3 are women soldiers and 1 is a civilian. Hamas has over 100 hostages in its custody since the 7th of October attack on Israel in 2023. Our big story this week, viewers. In a sweeping change to US immigration policy, children of H-1B and other temporary visa holders may no longer automatically gain US citizenship. This move puts millions in limbo, leaving families with uncertain futures. The temporary visa holders like H-1B, H-4, L and F now face new restrictions affecting access to critical resources, whether it's education, financial aid, or even basic rights. But there's a silver lining, viewers, in all of this, which is that rule won't impact those already born in the US, offering a small sense of relief. Even those born till the 19th of February 2025 will be able to meet that threshold limit. But the stakes? Well, there are over 1 million Indians that are currently waiting for their green cards. And the clock is ticking. With over 4.8 million Indian Americans in the US, this policy has the potential to reshape the future for generations to come going forward. Meanwhile, as trade tensions mount between India and the US, the question of tariffs is at the forefront. Bilateral trade in the 2023-24 fiscal year between India and the US touched $120 billion, with US accounting for 18% of India's exports. India runs a trade surplus against USA. But that could all change if the US decides to pause tariffs on Indian goods, threatening key sectors, whether it's IT, pharmaceuticals, and others. So what's India's strategy in the face of these potential tariff hikes? Well, New Delhi will embrace possibly a multifaceted response. One that doesn't escalate to a full trade war, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we bend backwards to accommodate every demand of Donald Trump. Instead, India will likely increase its imports from the US for specific sectors. If needed, will probably retaliate with its own set of tariffs on particular sectors. Like in 2018, we did that on steel. New Delhi could also look to hike imports in sectors like energy, aerospace, or even medical devices, sectors that are very important to the Trump administration. Remember, retaliatory tariffs may be focused on areas like agricultural products, motorcycles, where Trump has already spoken about, like the Harley-Davidson motorcycles he's spoken about. Trade ties reflect counter tariffs on almonds and apples from the US were imposed when trade disputes flared up the last time around. He could probably do something similar as well. But in this give and take, are we going to be able to thrash out a deal? I spoke with C. Raja Mohan on my podcast. Listen in to what he said.
India's traditional style has been the other way. We announce a principle, and after that we don't have any flexibility. And that's why, despite India's growth of trade, in the WTO, everywhere India is seen with great suspicion, because we don't know when to stop bargaining and when to close a deal.
It is this suspicion that we have to end, viewers. Cut a deal if there's possibility to do so. But let me tell you, retaliation is not the only card that we have. We can even utilize this opportunity. It could be once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Why? There will be supply chain disruptions, because what India is going to face is going to be very small compared to what China is going to face. Because remember, China is a bigger threat for tariffs for Trump, along with Mexico and Canada, the two countries that he named on day one. Because with India, there is room for negotiations, not with some of these other countries. And the one area India needs to be cautious about is a possible levy on services, because that is one area where we run a services surplus against the US, one of the few countries to do so. And IT exports is probably going to be the biggest target for Donald Trump's administration when it comes to handling US-India trade ties. Shifting to our first wide-angle story, Make America Great Again, or MAGA, is not just a campaign slogan for Trump. It's fast becoming a template for global social change, probably a clarion call for a global movement of the hard right. And while Donald Trump is the poster boy of the hard right, Argentinian President Javier Milei is now emerging as its biggest champion. His over 30-minute speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he lashed out at the premier global grouping of the who's who of capitalism, focused on all that the right's main plank is all about: gender politics, diversity-related extreme ideological positions, bashing climate activists who choose climate activism over growth. But perhaps the Argentinian's sharpest criticism came for immigration, where he came out heavily against illegal immigration and how woke governments are allowing it due to their own guilt. And he also spoke about the fact that these immigrants are not of the same faith. Listen in to some clipping of what Javier Milei had to say.
Since the West is supposedly the root cause of all of the world's evils in history, it must redeem itself by opening its borders to everyone, which leads to a form of reverse colonization that resembles collective suicide. So this is how we now see images of hordes of immigrants who abuse, assault, or even kill European citizens whose only sin was not adhering to a particular religion.
So while Donald Trump has got cracking on his election promises with a slew of executive orders, even his criticism comes nowhere close to what Javier Milei had to say. He spoke about, in fact, he spoke to a full house in Davos, which tells you that the Make West Great Again campaign is not just about America or Argentina. There are much more, and there are many more players here. There's El Salvador, there's Hungary's Viktor Orban, and who are already in power. Then there's UK's Nigel Farage, Canada's Pierre Poilievre, set to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, France's Marine Le Pen, who's been waiting in the wings, and possibly Germany's Alice Weidel as well, all of whom could join in. The MWGA will reshape our times. Make no mistake, it will reshape the world, and particularly countries like India that stand at the cusp of dealing with its own ideological battles against entrenched leftist ideals. Deep-rooted, possibly ultra-nationalist and ultra-leftist positions related to socialism are being stamped out in favor of capitalism. Javier said that capitalism lifted 90% people out of poverty. This is not Javier speaking. This is the movement that is speaking, that is, in fact, engulfing countries around the world. In contrast, in India, what do you hear? Sections of intellectual and political class debating about the merits of wealth redistribution, possibly more freebies. Well, viewers, the axe on wokeism and left ideology has fallen and will probably sweep powerful people around the world, and India will not be an exception to that. Second wide-angle story on the show. India's neighborhood is witnessing rapid change, unmistakable shift. Bangladesh, a country which fought for independence against Pakistan, is now warming up to its former tormentor. Bangladesh and Pakistan are evaluating close military ties, with top-level military meetings and exchanges taking place, all driven by anti-India sentiments. As the largest investor in both Pakistan and Bangladesh, China is using its ability to stitch together a possible larger nexus. What form and shape it could take and what could be India's options, this report tells you.
गर्जना, जमीन पर ये जांबाजी भाषाओं में गूंजता है विजय घोष। ये नए भारत का आह्वान है।
India's backyard is witnessing multiple headwinds, with a slew of anti-India meetings. Bangladesh's interim foreign affairs advisor Tauhid Hussain held crucial talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing. Even as the head of Pakistan's ISI, Shahid Amir Afzara, was in Dhaka ahead of planned military drills in February. His visit came after decades of deep freeze between Bangladesh and Pakistani ties. But under Bangladesh's interim regime, led by Mohammad Yunus, engagement with Pakistan seems to have picked up. Yunus's recent public embrace of Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif at the United Nations was symbolic, a gesture that had been once unthinkable in Bangladeshi politics. It sent a powerful message that Bangladesh, despite its deep scars due to Pakistan's brutal suppression of Bengalis, now sees India as its bigger foe. Add to this the China factor. In the wake of Sheikh Hasina's ouster, China has woven itself into the fabric of Bangladesh's military, foreign policy and economy by pumping in a lot of money. In fact, it is Bangladesh's largest investor. As Bangladesh drifts closer to Pakistan, China stands to gain. If Pakistan re-establishes its foothold in Bangladesh, it could create a larger nexus against India. Pakistan could use Bangladesh as a launching pad for anti-India activities, more so since the India-Bangladesh border remains porous. ISI chief's visit in Dhaka was meant for building greater intel sharing between the two countries, a move that will allow Pakistani army and its proxies to freely use Bangladesh for anti-India activities. Indian forces have long prepared for a two-front war against China and Pakistan. And with Bangladesh joining the Nexus, India's security landscape will complicate further. All right, on that note, we slip into a very short break. On the other side of India Sense, we talk to former long-time trade negotiator on US-India trade ties. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India Sense. Let's get the top voice segment on the show. Mark Linscott, who is a former Assistant Trade Secretary at the US, joins me to talk about the US-India trade relationship. Mark, let me start by asking you, how do you see the trade relationship now under Donald Trump's administration?
Well, it's a bit counterintuitive to say this, but it is my belief. I think that with the Trump administration and even the threat of tariffs or potentially the imposition of tariffs, there are opportunities to actually improve the trade relationship, and that's essentially because the two sides will be playing for a lot. The stakes will be high. I expect that there will be leader-level attention, meaning President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, and that presents a set of circumstances that allow the two sides to come together, engage in give and take, and put a lot on the table, and ideally conclude, it may take some time, but ideally conclude a first ever US-India bilateral trade agreement. So I'm optimistic.
Well, this indeed is counterintuitive. I want to ask you, why are you so optimistic? And do you think some of this is Trump's rhetoric, maybe posturing for better negotiations?
Well, yes, I do think that there's a degree of posturing, and certainly on the part of the Trump administration, only a couple days old. There is, I think, a desire to leverage at least the threat of tariffs to commence a trade negotiation, and let's not minimize some of the difficulties of that. A trade negotiation could be very, very hard and difficult to conclude. But that said, the two sides do have experience negotiating with each other on trade. During the first Trump administration, this was when I was at the U.S. Trade Representative's office as the Assistant USTR for South and Central Asia, we had a situation in which India's benefits under the GSP program, the Generalized System of Preferences program, were being threatened. There was a review looking to suspend those benefits. And it was that impetus that got the two sides to the table and came very close to concluding a trade deal. It would have been a smaller trade deal, but it certainly would have been a significant accomplishment. And I think it's unfortunate it didn't happen then. I am much more hopeful this time around that there can be a trade deal during the Trump second term of office.
All right, Mark Lynn Scott, thanks much for speaking to me on India Sense. Inside Story segment on the show. Well, it's been a week of bad news related to climate and environment. And within an hour of entering the Oval Office this week, President Trump led America's exit from the Paris Accord, throwing weaker nations into greater jeopardy since there will not be enough climate funding to aid the transition towards carbon commitments. COP's $300 billion by 2035 pledge is now pretty much up in the air. But the fact is, climate challenges are not unique to developing countries. And no one knows this better than America, which is battling another wave of wildfires. Well, this report tells you why extreme temperatures and these wildfires are just another sign why Donald Trump needs to stay invested when it comes to climate accords. Raging wildfires in America have a story to tell, one of destruction and ignorance. A fortnight after California witnessed its worst fire in many decades, more have been lit. While this time the devastation and loss of life may have been contained, the long-term impact of climate change is undeniable. Worse still, cities that are used to hurricanes are now getting snowstorms. Cold and snow are challenges that southern states in America are not equipped to handle. Freak snowstorms have impacted power grids, airport infrastructure, and everything else across southern states. From Louisiana to Florida to Texas, Americans are struggling, and so are their cities. America's struggles, though well documented, are just a small part of how the world, particularly the poor countries, are struggling to cope with. Last year, America contributed $11 billion towards climate finance, mostly in the form of costly loans. This line of funding is now likely to dry up. With Donald Trump's public declaration that nations don't need or are not fit to get funding. The ferocity of the blazes in US were fueled by climate change. But it seems the MAGA brigade, instead of learning its lessons, is pushing the world further into chaos and uncertainty. Well, in an age where technology drives modern warfare, India is truly stepping up its game. As regional tensions simmer, India's massive $3.2 billion space initiative is positioning it as a powerhouse in the battle for supremacy in this space. And let's take a look at this report that tells you India's ambitious space-based surveillance program and how it could change the landscape of military intelligence in India's neighborhood. India is working on the third phase of its cutting-edge space-based surveillance or SBS program. Sending a clear message to the world, when it comes to defense, New Delhi is no longer just playing catch-up. Aiming to launch 52 low Earth and geostationary orbit satellites within the next decade, India is not just eyeing the skies, but also making an unflinching claim to the heavens themselves. This colossal space-based sensor network, designed to track everything from enemy warships to missile launchers, is a game-changer in the military theatre. Unlike its previous efforts, the SBS-3 is not just a set of eyes in the sky. It's a smart, AI-powered constellation of surveillance systems that can communicate and cooperate in real time. Imagine a high-altitude satellite detecting a threat and instantly passing the baton to a low-orbit satellite for a closer look. It's surveillance on steroids and promises to leave no stone or satellite unturned. Now, what does this mean for India's neighbours? Pakistan and China may now find it harder to keep their activities under wraps. India's new space sensors will allow it to monitor both land and sea-based operations, and this could dramatically alter the calculus in future standoffs, both in the air and on the ground. But make no mistake, India isn't just playing defense. This is a clear message to both Pakistan and China. New Delhi is no longer reliant on foreign satellite technology. No more looking to the US or Israel or any other country for high-resolution imagery. The SBS-3 is all about homegrown technology, and in the coming years, India plans to build a self-sufficient AI-powered spy network among the most sophisticated in the world. And let's not forget, this isn't just about gathering intel. The real magic lies in India's ability to respond with the launch-on-demand capability. India could potentially launch a 650-kilogram satellite into space within an hour from a mobile platform. The ability to keep your watchful eye in space operational at all times is what separates the giants from the also-rans. Well, viewers, that's all the time we have in this edition of India Sense. But before we wrap things up, on your screens is that QR code that you can scan and get all the latest news, views, interviews, perspectives when it comes to India Sense. Thanks so much for watching this edition. See you next week.